I heard them decide my fate through a door that was not fully closed. The sound was a low murmur, the conspiratorial hum of a world to which I was adjacent but never truly a part. My father's voice, thin and brittle with desperation, sliced through the drone. "Rosamond must be perfect. Everything depends on the Duke's impression." Then a pause, and my stepmother's sharper reply, a needle stitching their shared ambition. "And the other one? She is always lurking in the shadows. What are we to do with Ilara?" A sigh, heavy with the weight of my perceived uselessness, and then the words that would etch themselves into the marrow of my bones. "Forget her name," my father told the room. "She is a trifle, a footnote. Keep her out of sight." A trifle, a footnote. I stood in the dim corridor, the leather spine of a book cold against my palm, and felt myself dissolve. It was not a new sensation, this feeling of becoming translucent, of my edges blurring into the damask wallpaper and the dark, heavy furniture of our perpetually failing estate. For all of my 19 years, I had been the shadow cast by my sister, Rosamond. She was the sun, a creature of dazzling light and effortless charm, her laughter like a string of pearls. I was the quiet corner where the dust settled, the forgotten book with the cracked spine, the window that overlooked the gray northern sea. My plainness was a known fact in our household, a truth as solid and unmovable as the ancient stones of the house itself. I did not mind it, not truly. It afforded me a certain freedom, the liberty of the invisible, to read and to think and to watch the world from a safe and silent distance. But to be dismissed so utterly, to have my very name wiped from the ledger of consequence, that struck a different chord. It was a cold, quiet violence. I retreated to my room, a small chamber under the eaves where the wind always seemed to whine a mournful tune, and looked at my reflection in the distorted glass of the old mirror. I saw a pale face, eyes the color of a stormy sky, and a mouth that had forgotten the habit of smiling. I was not ugly, but I lacked the vital spark of beauty, the incandescent glow that made people stop and look. I was simply there, a piece of furniture the family had grown too accustomed to notice. The Duke of Blackwood was coming. His name was a thunderclap in the muted halls of our home. He was a man of immense wealth and staggering influence, a figure spoken of in hushed, reverent tones in London drawing rooms I would never enter. He was also, by all accounts, a man carved from granite and grief. His wife had died years ago, a tragedy that had reportedly sealed him away from the softer parts of the world, leaving him cold, severe, and utterly uninterested in the frivolities of society. And yet, he was looking for a new duchess. Or rather, his advisors had decreed that he must secure an heir. My father, drowning in a sea of debt only he refused to acknowledge, saw the Duke's calculated search as a life raft. Rosamond, with her porcelain skin and hair like spun gold, was to be the price of our salvation. She was being polished for the occasion, like a precious jewel. New gowns of silk and velvet, ribbons from France, lessons in the pianoforte until her fingers ached. She bore it all with a kind of weary grace, for Rosamond, despite her beauty, possessed a gentle soul. She sometimes looked at me with a flicker of guilt in her blue eyes, as if she knew the scales of our lives were unjustly balanced. "He sounds terrifying, Ilara," she whispered to me one night, her voice small in the vast, cold bedroom we had once shared. "They say he never smiles." I had no comfort to offer, only the quiet truth. "Then you must be the one to teach him how." It was what was expected of her. It was what was expected of the sun, to warm even the coldest stone. On the day of his arrival, the house held its breath. The air was thick with the scent of beeswax and my stepmother's rising panic. I was instructed to make myself useful and, above all, invisible. I wore my plainest gray dress, a garment of such profound modesty it was practically an apology for existing. I was tasked with ensuring the tea service in the drawing room was perfect, a role usually reserved for a maid, but my presence was considered less obtrusive than a servant's. a ghost in my own home. When the Duke of Blackwood's carriage rolled up the gravel drive, it felt as though a storm cloud had passed before the sun. The man who stepped out was taller than I had imagined, and darker. He moved with an economy of motion that was unnervingly precise, his black coat absorbing the pale afternoon light. He was not handsome in the way of the young dandies who sometimes called on Rosamond. His face was all harsh angles and stark planes, a face that looked as though it had been weathered by gales I could not comprehend. His eyes, when he briefly scanned the entryway where we were all assembled like nervous statues, were the color of winter frost. The drawing room was a stage set for a careful performance. My father bowed too low. My stepmother's smile was a brittle, painted thing. Rosamond, in a gown the color of a blush rose, was breathtaking. She was a painting come to life, a perfect English rose presented for inspection, and I was in the corner by the tea cart, a gray moth hovering near a vibrant butterfly. I poured the tea, my hands steady despite the tremor in my soul. I kept my eyes down, focusing on the delicate dance of amber liquid filling a porcelain cup. I was a footnote. I was a name to be forgotten. He accepted his cup from my hand without a glance. His conversation with my father was clipped and formal, his questions about the estate sharp and intelligent. He did not offer compliments. He did not engage in pleasantries. He simply observed, his gaze sweeping the room with an assessing quality that seemed to miss nothing. Rosamond spoke when spoken to, her voice a soft melody, but even her charm seemed to slide off his severe composure. He was, I realized, precisely as terrifying as the rumors suggested. Then it happened. A small, clumsy accident that felt like a cataclysm. As I reached to refill my father's cup, my sleeve caught on the silver sugar tongs. They clattered to the polished floor, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the tense silence. Every head turned. Color flooded my cheeks, a hot, shameful tide. I bent quickly to retrieve them, my hair falling across my face, wishing the floor would swallow me whole. "Leave it," my father snapped, his voice sharp with embarrassment. "Ilara, you are dismissed." I froze, halfway to the floor, the tongs just beyond my fingertips. Dismissed. Like a clumsy maid. I straightened up, my spine rigid with a pain that was deeper than mere humiliation. I expected the dupe to look away, to return to his conversation, to erase the awkward interruption from the record. He did not. Instead, he watched me. It was not a glance, not the polite sweep of a gentleman's gaze, but a direct, focused, and unnervingly thorough inspection. His frosted eyes moved over my flushed face, my simple dress, my trembling hands. It felt as though he were reading the pages of a book I had not known was open. The silence stretched, becoming thin and taut. For the first time that day, the Duke's severe expression shifted, a flicker of something unreadable in the depths of his eyes. Curiosity? Annoyance? I could not tell. He broke the silence, his voice a low baritone that seemed to vibrate in the air. He did not address my father. He addressed the room. "And your other daughter? I did not hear her name." My father blinked, caught off guard. "Her? That is Ilara. A trifle." The word hung in the air between us, a fresh wound. The Duke's gaze did not leave my face. He inclined his head, a minuscule, formal gesture. And then he spoke the words that shattered the carefully constructed reality of my world. "Miss Ilara," he said, his voice quiet but carrying an undeniable weight of command. "Would you repeat your name for me? Slowly." I looked at him then, truly looked at him, and in the cold depths of his eyes, for one startling, impossible moment, I felt seen. I took a breath, slow and deep and shaking. "My name," I said, my own voice a surprise to me, clear and steady, "is Ilara." The days that followed were a study in quiet disruption. The Duke, to the utter bewilderment of my family, did not forget my name. He did not forget my existence. On the contrary, He seemed to seek it out. The next morning he found me in the library, the one room in the house that felt like a sanctuary. I was perched on a ladder, reaching for a high shelf, when his shadow fell across the floor. "Miss Ilara," he said, and I nearly tumbled from my perch. He steadied the ladder with a firm hand, his presence filling the dusty silence of the room. He asked what I was reading. I showed him the worn volume of Seneca, my cheeks warming under his scrutiny. "A stoic choice for a young lady," he observed, his tone neutral, yet his eyes were sharp with an intelligence that I sensed missed nothing. Instead of the polite dismissal I expected, he began to speak of the Stoics, of Marcus Aurelius, displaying a depth of knowledge that went far beyond the casual education of a nobleman. I found myself replying, my initial timidity giving way to the pleasure of a true conversation, a meeting of minds that was as unexpected as it was exhilarating. We spoke for nearly an hour, surrounded by the silent, leather-bound witnesses of history and philosophy. My stepmother found us there, her face a mask of polite fury. Rosamond was waiting in the drawing room, her needlepoint untouched. The Duke merely gave a slight bow and said, "Your daughter has a formidable intellect, madam. It is a refreshing quality." He had called me formidable. Me, Ilara, the trifle. It was the beginning of a pattern. He would seek me out. Not for flirtation, not for the courtly games my sister was prepared for, but for conversation. He requested I show him the gardens, and instead of admiring the roses, he asked me about crop rotation on the home farm, listening to my hesitant observations with an unnerving intensity. He seemed to dissect my thoughts, to weigh my words, and in doing so, he gave them a value I had never known they possessed. My family was thrown into a state of baffled agitation. My father did not know whether to be pleased at the Duke's continued presence or horrified that he was wasting his attention on the wrong daughter. My stepmother's animosity towards me grew with each passing day, her smiles becoming thinner, her comments more pointed. "One hopes the Duke does not mistake a head full of dusty books for a suitable temperament in a duchess," she remarked one evening, her words aimed at me like poisoned darts. Rosamond, bless her gentle heart, was merely confused, but seemed almost relieved to be spared the full force of the Duke's severe attention. She would watch us, her head tilted, a small, puzzled frown on her perfect face. And then came the act of secret kindness. The autumn evenings were growing colder, and my room under the eaves was drafty. My shawl was thin and worn, a pathetic defense against the encroaching chill. I never spoke of it, for to speak of a need was to draw attention, and attention was a currency I could not afford. One afternoon, upon returning to my room, I found a parcel on my bed, wrapped in plain brown paper. There was no note. Inside was a shawl of the softest cashmere I had ever touched, the color of deep heather, warm and impossibly luxurious. It could have come from only one person. There was no one else who would have noticed my shivering, no one else who possessed the means or the inclination for such a gesture. I wrapped it around my shoulders, and the warmth that spread through me was more than just physical. It was the heat of being considered, of being cared for in a way that was silent and profound. It was a secret thread connecting his world to mine. Our conversations in the library became a daily ritual. It was there, amidst the scent of aging paper and leather, that the world outside seemed to fall away. We were not a duke and a footnote. We were two minds finding a rare and startling resonance. One afternoon, we stood before a large atlas, tracing the routes of ancient explorers. He was pointing to a line on the map, his long, elegant finger next to mine. As he spoke, the back of his hand brushed against my own. It was the briefest of touches, skin against skin, but a jolt went through me, a current of heat so intense it stole my breath. I drew my hand back as if burned. He fell silent, and when I dared to look up at him, his gaze was fixed on me. His expression shuddered but for a strange, dark fire in his eyes. The air between us grew thick and heavy, charged with all the things we could not say. The room, which had been a sanctuary, suddenly felt small and dangerously intimate. He broke the silence first, his voice slightly rougher than usual. "Ilara," he said, using my given name without its formal prefix for the first time. The sound of it, spoken in his low tones, was a key turning in a lock I had not known was there. He then corrected himself, a flicker of something like regret on his face. "Forgive me, Miss Ilara." But the slip had been made. The wall of formality had been breached. Later that week, as we walked the windy path along the cliffs overlooking the sea, he stopped and turned to me. The wind whipped a strand of hair across my face, and he reached out, his fingers gently tucking it behind my ear. His touch lingered for a fraction of a second too long. "In the library," he said, his voice low against the roar of the waves. "When we are not performing for your family, I would ask you to call me Alistair." Alistair. It was a name of strength and history, a name that felt too grand for my lips. To use a duke's Christian name was a shocking intimacy, a leap across a social chasm so wide I could not see the other side. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was no longer a game of intellectual curiosity. This was something else, something terrifying and hopeful and utterly transformative. I could only nod, the word caught in my throat. But in that moment, a silent pact was made. We were no longer simply the Duke of Blackwood and the Baron's forgotten daughter. We were Alistair and Ilara, and I knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and frightened me, that nothing would ever be the same. The illusion of our quiet intellectual sanctuary was shattered by the arrival of a letter. It was delivered by a special courier from London, a man whose grim expression seemed to portend disaster. The letter was for my father, sealed with a crest I did not recognize. He took it to his study, and a short while later I heard the sound of my stepmother's raised, frantic voice. My own sense of unease, a constant low hum beneath the surface of my newfound hope, sharpened into genuine fear. Later that night, unable to sleep, I crept downstairs for a book. A sliver of light shone from beneath the door of my father's study. I knew I should not, but an irresistible impulse drew me closer. The door was ajar, and I could hear my father's voice, thick with despair. "It is ruin, I tell you. Absolute ruin. Lord Ashworth is calling in the notes. We do not have a fraction of what is owed." I pressed my ear closer, my blood turning to ice. I knew of Lord Ashworth, a man with a reputation for being a ruthless moneylender disguised as a gentleman. I did not know my father was in his debt. My stepmother's reply was cold and pragmatic. "Then you must press the Duke. The contract must be signed. Rosamond is our only hope." A contract. My mind snagged on the word. What contract? Driven by a dreadful premonition, I waited until the house was deep in the silence of the night before slipping into the study. My father was a careless man, and I found the letter quickly, discarded on his desk. It was from Lord Ashworth's solicitor, a brutal, uncompromising demand for payment. But beneath it was another document, a draft of an agreement. My eyes scanned the dense legal script, my heart sinking with every word. It was a marriage contract between Rosamond and the Duke of Blackwood. But it was more than that. It was a business transaction. In exchange for Rosamond's hand, the Duke would assume all of my father's debts, including the crippling sum owed to Ashworth. The estate, my home, was essentially the dowry. My father was not just offering his daughter, he was selling her to save himself. I sank into the chair, the pages trembling in my hand. Every kind word, every shared look, every moment of connection I had felt with Alistair curdled into ash. It was all a lie. His attention, his conversations, his secret kindness. It was all part of a meticulous, cold-hearted assessment. He was not interested in my mind. He was inspecting the foundations of the property he was about to acquire. I was not a person to him. I was a curiosity, a minor feature of the estate, perhaps a measure of the family's character, or lack thereof. The warmth of the cashmere shawl I wore felt like a brand of shame. The intimacy of his name, Alistair, tasted like poison in my mouth. I had been a fool, a naive, romantic fool, so starved for a crumb of attention that I had mistaken a predator's careful examination for genuine interest. The pain was a physical thing, a vice tightening around my chest. I felt more invisible than ever before, not just overlooked but deliberately used, my intellect and my feelings treated as mere tools in his negotiation. The trifle had been picked up, examined for its quality, and would soon be set aside once the real prize was secured. The next morning I sought him out. I found him walking by the ornamental lake, the gray water mirroring the grim set of his face. He saw me approaching, and a rare, small smile touched his lips, a smile that now looked to me like the height of duplicity. I did not wait for him to speak. I held out the contract, my hand shaking with a rage that was cold and pure. "Was this all a negotiation, Your Grace?" I asked, my voice tight and brittle. "Was I merely a line item to be assessed? A test of the family's breeding stock before you finalized the purchase of my sister?" The smile vanished from his face. He looked from the papers in my hand to my eyes, and for the first time, I saw him look truly unguarded. The expression that crossed his features was not guilt or anger, but a deep, profound shock, followed by something that looked devastatingly like pain. He did not deny the document. He did not offer excuses. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice low and strained. "Does it matter?" I shot back, the hurt making me reckless. "It is the truth, is it not? You came here to buy a wife and save an estate. All of this, the books, the conversations, it was all a charade, a cruel, calculated game to you." He took a step closer, his eyes holding mine. "The contract was your father's proposal, Ilara, not mine. It is true that I knew of his debts. It is the reason I accepted his invitation." He paused, and his next words were heavy with a sincerity that I desperately wanted to disbelieve. "I came here to assess a catastrophe. I came to see if your father's estate was worth saving from a man like Ashworth. I did not, under any circumstances, plan for you." His words hung in the cold air, a catastrophe he did not plan for. Was that what I was to him? A complication? "Everything I have said to you, every moment we have shared, has been the only truth in this entire damnable affair," he continued, his voice raw with an emotion I could not name. "This contract, this is the charade, your father's desperate attempt to sell his daughter, an offer I was never going to accept." I wanted to believe him. Oh, how I wanted to. But the wound of betrayal was too fresh, too deep. "Why should I believe you?" I whispered, the fight going out of me, leaving only a hollow ache. "Kindness from men like you always comes with an invisible invoice. What is it you truly want?" Alistair looked away from me then, out across the gray, still water of the lake. The silence stretched, filled only by the cry of a distant gull. When he finally turned back to me, his face was a mask of weary resolution, the face of a man about to lay all his cards upon the table. "You are right to question me," he said, his voice quiet but resonant. "You have been given no reason to trust. Allow me to give you one." He reached into the inner pocket of his coat and produced not one, but two folded documents. He held them out to me. "This," he said, tapping the first, "is my correspondence with my solicitor, dated from before I ever set foot in this house. It outlines my intention to purchase your father's debt from Lord Ashworth directly, and to restructure it with terms he could actually meet. The goal was to prevent him from having to sell his daughter, any of his daughters, to the highest bidder." My fingers trembled as I took the letters. The legal language was complex, but the meaning was clear. He had come not as a suitor, but as a rescuer, albeit a clinical, detached one. His plan had been to save the estate, to untangle the financial mess and leave. There was no mention of marriage. There was only business. "And this?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, indicating the second document. This, he said, his eyes locking with mine, a profound vulnerability in their depths, is a letter I wrote to you last night. A letter I did not intend to send. A letter I wrote because I could not sleep for thinking of how to explain myself without sounding like a calculating brute. He did not give it to me. He held it, as if it were a confession too dangerous to release. Ilara, I have spent the last 5 years of my life encased in ice. After my wife's death, I made my world very small, very orderly. Grief was my companion, and duty was my guide. I came here out of a sense of duty, a responsibility to a lesser nobleman whose family had served mine for generations. It was meant to be a simple, impersonal transaction. He took a breath, a long, unsteady thing. But it was not simple, because you were here. From the moment I saw you, standing in that room full of pretense and desperation, you were the only person who seemed real. You did not flatter, you did not fawn. You simply existed, with your quiet strength and your books and your eyes that saw everything. You were not a trifle. You were the center of gravity in a world that had tilted off its axis. His voice grew rougher, thick with an emotion that stripped away the last of his ducal armor. I found myself seeking you out, not from calculation, but from a need I did not know I had. A need to hear your thoughts, to see the world through your clear gaze. You did not thaw the ice, Ilara. You shattered it, and frankly, it terrified me. He looked down at the contract I still held, a look of disgust on his face. To see this, to know that you believed I was capable of such a cold transaction involving you or your sister, it is a dishonor I cannot bear. Tears were streaming down my face, hot and silent. They were not tears of sorrow, but of a vast, overwhelming release. The truth, when it came, was more powerful and more beautiful than I could have imagined. He had not been playing a game. He had been as lost and as surprised as I was. Alistair, I whispered, the name now feeling right and true on my tongue. He finally held out the second letter. Read it later, he said softly. It says all of this far less eloquently. All that matters now is that you know the truth. I have already set the wheels in motion to resolve your father's debts. You are not for sale. You were never for sale. He stepped closer, his presence a solid warmth against the chill air. Your family will not be pleased. They want a duchess, not a solvent baron. They will fight this. I looked up at him, at this severe, complicated man who had seen me when no one else had. I saw the truth in his eyes, and I saw the future he was offering. It was not just a future free from debt, but a future of being seen, of being valued. A future with him. I straightened my shoulders, the cashmere shawl a comforting weight. Then let them fight, I said, my voice clear and strong. They will find I am not such a trifle after all. A smile, a true and genuine smile, finally broke across his face. It transformed him, chasing the shadows from his eyes and revealing the man he had kept hidden for so long. In that moment, we were no longer a duke and a commoner, no longer a creditor and a debtor's daughter. We were an alliance. We were Alistair and Ilara. And we had a battle to win. The battle came, as I knew it would, in the most public of arenas, the autumn assembly ball at the county seat. It was the pinnacle of the local social season, a glittering affair where reputations were made and destroyed over glasses of lukewarm champagne. My stepmother had insisted on our attendance, her last desperate gamble to showcase Rosamond and force the Duke's hand. She had procured a new gown for my sister, a confection of ivory silk and pearls that made her look ethereal. For me, she had offered nothing. I wore an old blue velvet, mended and altered, but with Alistair's heather-colored shawl around my shoulders, I felt more armored than if I had been wearing steel. Alistair arrived separately, a dark, commanding presence who drew every eye in the room. He greeted my parents with a cool, formal nod, his gaze sweeping the room until it found mine. He walked directly to me, bypassing Rosamond completely. He bowed, a gesture of profound respect, and offered me his arm. "Miss Elara," he said, his voice carrying in the sudden hush, "I believe you promised me the first dance." A collective gasp rippled through the assembly. To single out the plain, forgotten sister in such a pointed and public manner was a declaration. It was a shot fired across the bow of every social expectation. I placed my hand on his arm, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs, and allowed him to lead me to the dance floor. We moved through the steps of the waltz, a silent island in a sea of whispered speculation. He held me securely, his eyes never leaving my face. "Are you ready?" he murmured, his voice for my ears alone. I met his gaze and nodded. "I am." After the dance, he did not leave my side. We stood near a pillar, observing the room, and I felt the weight of hundreds of eyes on us. My stepmother, her face pale with fury, saw her plans turning to dust. She was a cornered animal, and cornered animals are always the most dangerous. She marched towards us, my father trailing in her wake like a nervous ship. She did not bother with pleasantries. Her voice was high and shrill, laced with a venom that turned heads across the ballroom. "Your Grace," she began, her eyes fixed on Alistair, but her words a clear attack on me. "I must protest this spectacle. My daughter Rosamond is the one you came to see. This one," she gestured at me with a flick of her wrist, as if shooing away a fly, "has clearly filled your head with nonsense from her books. She is a schemer, a plain, devious girl attempting to steal what is rightfully her sister's." The music faltered and died. The entire room was silent, watching, waiting. This was it, the moment of my public execution or my vindication. In the past, I would have shrunk, I would have dissolved into the wallpaper, wishing for death. But I was not that person anymore. Alistair's belief in me had forged a spine of steel where only resilience had been before. Before he could speak, I took a step forward. My voice, when it came, was not loud, but it was clear and cold, and carried to every corner of the silent room. "My only scheme, madam, was to wish for a little warmth in a cold house. My only deviance was to enjoy the quiet company of books." I looked directly into her eyes, no longer afraid. "It is you who speak of what is rightfully owed. Tell me, what is the proper price for a daughter? How many acres is my sister worth? How many debts does her happiness repay?" A horrified murmur went through the crowd. My stepmother recoiled as if struck. It was then that Alistair moved. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The authority in his bearing was absolute. He addressed not my stepmother, but Sir William Croft, the most influential magistrate in the county who was standing nearby. "Sir William," he said, his tone calm and conversational, yet utterly commanding, "there seems to be a grave misunderstanding. The Baron," he nodded towards my pale, trembling father, "found himself in some financial difficulty. As a friend of his family, I have taken the liberty of purchasing his outstanding debts and consolidating them under my own authority. There will be no foreclosures. There will be no ruin." He paused, letting the words sink in. "And there will be no marriage contract. Any talk of such a thing was born of desperation and is now, thankfully, a closed matter." He then turned his gaze back to my stepmother, and it was as cold as a winter tomb. "I am not in the market for a duchess, madam, but if I were, I would choose a woman of substance, integrity, and intellect." "A woman very much like your daughter." He looked at me, his eyes softening. "Your daughter, Elara." The defeat was absolute. My stepmother's ambition, my father's weakness, it was all laid bare for the entire county to see. They had not just been defeated, they had been rendered irrelevant. They were the trifles now, the footnotes in a story that had become mine. Without another word, Alistair took my hand. "I believe this evening has reached its conclusion," he said softly, and led me from the ballroom. We left behind a scene of social carnage, a flurry of whispers that would become a legend by morning. We walked out onto the cool stone terrace, the night air a balm on my heated skin. The distant sounds of the orchestra starting up again felt like they were from another world, another lifetime. He led me to a quiet corner, sheltered by ivy that climbed the ancient walls. The moon was a sliver of silver in the inky sky. He did not speak, but turned to face me, his hands coming up to cup my face. His thumbs traced the line of my jaw, his touch infinitely tender. All the turmoil, all the fear and anger of the past days melted away under his gaze. Here, in the quiet dark, we were simply a man and a woman who had found each other against impossible odds. "Ilara," he breathed, his voice full of a wonder that humbled me. He lowered his head, and I lifted my face to his. His kiss was not the frantic, passionate embrace of a storybook. It was slow and deep and certain. It was a question and an answer, a promise and a homecoming. It was the sealing of the pact we had made, a silent vow that we would face the world together. In that kiss I was no longer invisible. I was known. I was cherished. I was finally, irrevocably, home. 3 months later, we were married in the small stone chapel on his estate, Blackwood Manor. The sun, a rare and welcome guest in the late autumn, streamed through the stained glass windows, painting us in jewels of light. I wore a simple gown of ivory cream, and around my shoulders, over the fine silk, was the heather-colored cashmere shawl. It had been my secret talisman, and I would not part with it. My sister Rosamond was there, her happiness for me genuine and shining. She had, in the wake of our family's social collapse, found a quiet strength of her own, accepting the suit of a neighboring gentleman farmer, a kind man who loved her for her gentle heart, not her potential as collateral. Our new life at Blackwood was one of quiet, profound contentment. The manor, which I had imagined as a formidable Gothic fortress, was in fact a place of warmth and light. Its heart was the library, a magnificent 2-story room filled with thousands of books and flooded with afternoon sun. It was our sanctuary, the place where our story had truly begun. We would spend hours there, reading side by side in comfortable silence, or debating philosophy until the embers in the fireplace burned low. Alistair, the severe and silent Duke, had been replaced by my husband, a man with a quick, dry wit and a smile that he reserved only for me. He was still a man of duty and immense responsibility, but he no longer carried his burdens alone. We carried them together. His loyal housekeeper, a formidable woman named Mistress Thorne, who had been terrified of me at first, now greeted me each morning with a genuine smile, having decided that the woman who had brought laughter back into the Duke's life was worthy of her fierce loyalty. She would bring us tea in the library, shaking her head in fond exasperation at the stacks of books that seemed to multiply on every available surface. One crisp winter afternoon, I was sitting by the fire, a book open in my lap, watching Alistair at his desk. He was engrossed in some estate business, a slight frown of concentration on his face. The light from the window caught the silver threads at his temples, and a wave of such intense love and gratitude washed over me that it almost took my breath away. He must have felt my gaze, for he looked up, his expression softening instantly. "What is it?" he asked. I smiled. "I was just thinking," I said, "about a conversation I overheard a long time ago, through a door that was not fully closed." I saw a flicker of understanding and of old pain in his eyes. He left his desk and came to kneel before my chair, taking my hands in his. "I am sorry for what you endured," he said, his voice low, "for the blindness of your family." I shook my head, my fingers tightening around his. "Do not be. It made me who I am. I looked around the beautiful, warm room, at the man I loved, at the life we were building, a life of partnership and respect. I once thought my life was a footnote in someone else's story, but I was wrong. I reached up and touched his face, the harsh angles now so beloved and familiar. My story didn't begin until the day a terrifying Duke refused to forget my name.